Thank you, Kevin. Yes, welcome to the August meeting of SEVA, both in person and online. We currently have 11 participants in Zoom. You will see my profile in view, and approximately 20 souls present in the building, with one more arriving late. He's excused with this. And quite interesting times we continue to live in. I mean, what a week. The president issued an executive order to greatly accelerate EV adoption and deploy a national network of charging stations. The King 5 got to interview ex officio Lowe this evening, and he will be expected live on King 5 at, not live, recorded on King 5 at 9, 10, and 11 tonight. We have, oh shoot, significant grant funds coming to the state under formula. I believe it's 2.5 million, and opportunity to compete nationally for billions more in charging infrastructure grants. And the infrastructure bill passed the Senate today. And what else? It just keeps on coming.
Sun's out.
And Chevy hasn't solved their Bolt issue yet, but things are good in EV world. Tonight we have an auspicious guest, someone with which our very own Jeff Finn has worked for over 10 years now on the RUC. What's the rub? The road usage charge. EV drivers in Washington especially have felt like we had a target on our backs with the arbitrary and blunt registration surcharge that means we pay more per mile than Prius drivers do in taxes in return for trying to do the right thing and drive electric. But that is outside the purview of this presentation. And the most equitable way to replace those lost gas taxes would be a road usage charge. So anybody in the room participate in that pilot study that the state conducted? 1, 2, 3. Excellent. And your face is taking my shot.
Sorry, your audio stuff.
I did not voluntarily join that because as a 152-mile-a-day EV driver, I knew that I would pay through Wazoo, so I did not contribute my data. I did just get a big check from Tacoma Power for the conclusion of their 2-year EV charging study. So stay tuned. Results from that are expected in September, and we'll try to get someone from that utility this presentation. It was on, charging at work, in public, DC fast, usage patterns by a couple of hundred Tacoma Power EV customers. So that will be interesting. But we have with us Rima Griffith, Executive Director of the Washington State Transportation Commission since 2005. That's like 16 years in government land. Under her leadership, the Transportation Commission serves as the state tolling authority, sets the fees, fares, and policies for the ferry system, leads the long-range transportation planning process, convenes the autonomous vehicle work group, provides guidance to the legislature and the government, conducts special studies on finance and policy issues, including assessing road usage charging since 2012. Apparently, Jeff was working it a year before she was. Anyway, prior to the commission, Reamer worked as a senior policy and fiscal analysis in the legislature, and she even managed the trading floor for an international company. I will let you know that she recently purchased an internal combustion vehicle, but has pledged to correct her ways in the future. Without further ado, Miss Rima Griffith.
Thank you, you guys. Well, I'm sorry I can't be up in Seattle with you tonight. I would love to be there in person. But I'm down in Olympia and appreciate you guys offering a hybrid meeting like this so we can still talk and share information. The bio kind of covered it in terms of who the commission is. So I'm going to jump right into this presentation regarding our work on our road usage charge assessment. So real quick, the problem statement is always important to identify, and we did this with the legislature back in 2011, which is really what started this research effort. We know taxing fuel is no longer going to be a long-term, reliable, equitable source of funding for transportation. And this chart was the chart that got the attention of many legislators back in 2011 when we showed this forecast. And basically what you're seeing on the top line is our state's average MPG, currently at 20.5 miles per gallon fleet-wide. Our state forecasters conservatively estimate that that will rise to 35 miles per gallon by 2035. We think it will get there faster, but we go with the official forecast. And if we assume that, that's going to result in about a 42% decline in cents per mile in terms of the gas tax generation. So not an insignificant problem for the state to be facing in terms of how we're going to pay for transportation, in particular our roadways, given the gas tax is dedicated to highway purposes. We also know from our research that the gas tax has fairness and equity challenges. When it was first construed many decades ago, it was a very simple principle of users pays and users benefit. And we know over time, as automakers have rise to the challenge of advancing technology and alternative fuel exploration, that today we have the luxury of having choices of the kinds of cars we drive and the kinds of MPG they get, as well as the type of fuel they use. What this results though in is a situation where now we have some users paying for the roads, but all users benefiting. RUC really does return us to an all user pay, user benefit principle. This chart on the right really depicts kind of what we're facing today. And while we don't think about it, we all pay by per the mile right now under the gas tax if we're driving a fossil fuel vehicle. And if you look at that dot right there that plots our average 20.5 mile per gallon MPG average statewide, if you're driving a vehicle that's getting below that average today, you could be paying as much as 4, 5, or 6 cents a mile to drive on the roads under our current state's 49.4 cent gas tax. If you're fortunate enough to be in a car that falls in that green quadrant, that you're getting over that 20 mile per gallon average, you could be paying as little as 2 cents, maybe 1 cent a mile, and maybe no cents per mile in terms of gas tax. So you end up with a real swing here, depending on the car you drive, in terms of what we're all paying for the same roads that we use. We know that preserving current revenue levels of the gas tax is going to require frequent gas tax increases just to keep revenues at where they are today, not factoring in inflation. So in order for the gas tax to continue generating current levels of revenue, the legislature would need to raise the gas tax 1.7 cents per gallon every year through 2040, resulting in a gas tax by then that could be almost $1 a gallon. And while that may sound like a good idea in terms of suppressing interest in buying gas, what we do know is that this disproportionately starts impacting a smaller and smaller portion of the population who are unable to transfer from a fossil fuel car to an electric car, or perhaps an electric vehicle doesn't meet their lifestyle needs until we reach that point of where we have the necessary charging infrastructure in place. So what you're looking at is a quite significant heavy lift for the legislature just to maintain revenues that we're making today out to 2040. We know that plug-in electric vehicles are here and they're growing over time, and we kind of keep an eye on the Bloomberg forecast. As you can see over here, since 2017, they have been pulling back their expectation of when electric vehicles will reach price parity to a similar fossil fuel vehicle. And now they're saying this year, or sorry, in 2020, they haven't put out the 2021 forecast yet, that crossover point is actually going to be in 2022, where we will start to see some EVs around the same price as an equivalent gas-powered vehicle. That'll likely be in the SUV market and vehicle type, but we do expect by the end of the decade to see most, if not all, electric vehicles being comparably priced to a fossil fuel vehicle. And we know this price issue is definitely a big impediment to adoption. But we also know that having ubiquitous charging stations, not only in our state, but across the country, is also a critical piece of the transition that we see will generate a liftoff or an acceleration in the transition and a necessary investment to make. So what's Washington and other states doing to advance road usage charging? As you can see on this map, a number of states in green are doing pilots and demonstrations, including Washington State. In this darker blue, you see that Oregon, Utah, and Virginia all have actual legislatively enacted road usage charge programs where they are allowing drivers to enroll in a RUC program and pay by the mile in lieu of paying by the gallon of gas. What we know is that Oregon, Utah, and Virginia, while they're in the early stages, Virginia has yet to launch their program. Utah's been at it since 2020, and Oregon, I think, since 2012. The relatively small numbers of enrollment because they are voluntary, but we're seeing great progress and experience being gained through these states' work, and we work very closely with them as they advance their programs. The legislative direction to the commission on this matter back in 2012 was that the commission was to assess road usage charging's suitability as a sustainable long-term revenue source that could replace the gas tax. So it's important to keep in mind that throughout all our research, our core assumption has been that drivers would only pay one or the other, but not both taxes. So road charging is not on top of the gas tax, but would replace it. In order to compare the gas tax and road usage charging in terms of revenue generation, we came up with this equivalent 2.4 cent per mile rate, which is arrived by taking our state's gas tax and that average state MPG and doing a little math, and you come out with that rate. Drivers today can figure out exactly what they're paying in their vehicle today by doing the same math if they know their car's MPG. One of the other priorities of the commission and our steering committee that has done a lot of work is that drivers are going to have a choice for how their vehicle mileage will be collected, reported, and paid should the state advance a road usage charge system. So how would a RUC system work for Washington State? We've done a lot of research and testing and have got a lot of answers and ideas around how we can advance it. We did conduct a year-long statewide test of road usage charging in Washington State, where we had 2,000 test drivers from around the state test various options of how we could collect miles. We also did a pool of drivers from the city of Surrey, British Columbia, to test how a road usage charge process and reconciliation effort could occur between two countries, noting that our international border crossing is one of the busiest in the country. And we know that British Columbia has been considering a road usage charge up there as well. We also had a pool of drivers from Idaho and from Oregon participate in cross-border testing. And in particular in Oregon, we conducted the nation's first cash transaction test where drivers paid real money on both sides of the border. And we did a transaction between our two states where we moved real money through our treasuries and tested a reconciliation approach that we had built for the pilot to demonstrate nationally, noting this is a federally funded pilot. We wanted to demonstrate nationally that if this country is to face a situation where we're going to have a patchwork of states starting to do road usage charging absent a national policy, that there would be a way for states to reconcile what monies are due if we're going to start counting miles driven in each of our states. I know here are very important partners at SEVA as well as Plug in America who have been involved in our research and at the table with us throughout this work. We did in our pilot test 5 mileage reporting methods. The 2 on the left are intentionally low tech and do not involve GPS. And this was intentional. We wanted to be able to demonstrate that you could do road usage charging without the use of GPS technology. On the lower left, you see the mileage permit option. That's basically like a prepaid cell phone where drivers were given the choice to buy a block of miles. They would get a permit, and then they drove, and occasionally in the pilot, we had them on a quarterly basis take a picture of their odometer and text it in to verify that their total mile usage was still within the permit. As you can see, only 1% of our drivers tested that option. It was not popular. Above that, we tested what we call the odometer reading approach, which is a post-pay type of approach where drivers in the pilot drove, and then on a quarterly basis, we asked them to similarly take a picture of their odometer, text it in, and then they were sent an electronic invoice that basically showed them how many miles they drove, how much gas tax they paid, and what their RUC charges were. 28% of our drivers picked that option. And I will note that while most of our drivers had no problem taking a picture and texting it in, we did have a small handful of drivers who we accommodated by allowing them to go into a Department of Licensing office. There were 8 participating offices around the state where they could have their odometer read manually by a DOL employee if they did not want to text in that picture or they were unable to do so. On the right side, we move into where we do start using technology and GPS. The Mile Mapper smartphone app was a beta app developed with many smart students at the University of Washington. We developed this app and we capped the use in the pilot at 14% because it was so popular. But because we had a lot of federal dollars invested in this overall pilot effort, we didn't want to have everybody signing up for an app that may not work. So we capped it, but in the end, it worked really well. And what we were trying to demonstrate was that a smartphone could potentially be the gizmo of how we collect miles in the future and remit them without having to have something plugged into our car's OBD2 port or using even telematics. In this case, the app had a toggle switch where the driver could turn their GPS on and off. So for example, if you're a driver that goes out of state a lot, but you happen to pick an odometer read, a manual approach that is not sensitive to location, you might want to use that app and turn it on when you're leaving the state as a way to certify your out-of-state miles. So we see this as an important demonstration around bridge technologies that could allow drivers who don't really want the GPS all the time, but also want to have a way of making sure they're not overtaxed for miles that aren't eligible in Washington state. Lastly, in the bottom right, we tested a plug-in device. It was provided with or without GPS. This device is currently used in Oregon and in Utah as their primary way of collecting miles from their RUC participants. As you can see, 37% of our drivers selected the plug-in device with GPS, and 19% selected it without. When you combine that 19% with the 28% who selected the odometer read option, we had nearly half of our drivers saying no to GPS. So it's an important finding that really underscored the importance to lawmakers around how important it will be to offer drivers options of how they would participate in a program should they enact it. What we heard from our drivers over this one-year pilot was that we had concerns around how we were going to handle privacy and data protection, how fairness and equity would be addressed, what compliance and administration costs were going to look like, and how would we travel between states and ensure it wasn't going to become a hassle or potentially result in overtaxation on drivers. We had over 15 million miles collected successfully in this one-year pilot. We did 3 surveys, one at the beginning, one at the middle, and at the end of the pilot. And we conducted 6 focus groups from around the state. Some of them were focused on topics, other were geographically based, to gather direct, detailed input from people all over the state from different backgrounds. And lastly, we collected over 1,900 emails and phone calls, noting that about 38% of those came from members of the public who were not involved in the pilot. So there was a high level of interest and a lot of questions asked that really helped get the public dialogue going on the topic. Just a couple key findings from those surveys that we conducted of our 2,000 drivers. We did a survey at the beginning, at the end, the top bar reflecting survey 1's data, the bottom bar for survey 3. And we asked those drivers, fairness aside, knowing what you know today, which method to fund transportation would you prefer? As you can see, after they gained some experience in the RUC pilot, we had a growth of 10% of those saying they would prefer RUC, paying by the mile. But we also saw growth in the gas tax, where we had people saying they equally preferred RUC or the gas tax. So overall, we saw a significant jump, just further demonstrating that as people experienced the actual program, saw how it worked, and saw what the cost implications would be for them personally, we saw quite a significant gain in support. We asked participants what their advice would be to elected officials as they considered next steps for RUC statewide. We had about 61% basically saying to implement RUC somewhere between the next 5 and 10 years. Notably, we also had folks say around 28% of them saying that you should implement RUC, but on a more narrow basis, noting that when we asked folks or gave them the option of a RUC system only applying to electric vehicles, only 9% of our drivers suggested that was the way to go. So how can privacy be protected? We really believe that it can be done through system design, providing users choice, and of course, strong legal protections. Right now, to do a road usage charge program in Washington state, you don't need GPS technology. And the only new piece of information really needed for a system that the Department of Licensing does not already collect is total miles driven. A lot of states have safety vehicle inspections that they do every year. We used to do those in Washington state until I think it was the early 90s. It was repealed by the legislature. But in many states, those vehicle safety inspections is a time when those odometers are red. So in Washington State, we would need to add a way to get those total miles driven. But with that, we have 4 mileage reporting options that we know are successfully tested and will work without drivers having to use GPS. If they wanted to use GPS, it would purely be for their own convenience. And we know that we can also suggest to the legislature that they enact enabling laws that have strong privacy and data protection provisions in the law that help ensure that drivers' data is protected and that there's strong and serious consequences for misuse. So how will RUC impact rural and low-income drivers? Well, we know one finding is that it's really going to be what you drive, the type of car you drive, and not how far you drive, that's going to determine the financial impact RUC has on a given driver. In this map, I apologize for being blurry. It's not the greatest image, but it came from a study that was conducted by the RUC West Consortium. And they were looking at impacts of RUC on lower income drivers in a number of states, including Washington State. And what we learned is that rural and lower income households tend to drive lower MPG vehicles and therefore pay disproportionately today for roads under the gas tax. As you can see in this map, all this dark green and light green area of the state actually would see a decrease of 1 to 5% or in excess of 5% in taxes paid by drivers under a road usage charge system. Where you see these orange and red areas, and there's a blotch over here that actually is a bit of a blip in the data. That's actually the Hanford site that has a number of electric vehicles on site. Those are pockets where you expect drivers to pay a little more in taxes as a result of RUC, and that's largely due to the predominance and growth of electric vehicles in those areas. So how will RUC influence plug-in electric vehicles? We believe that most PEVs will be held harmless, but we know that introductory rates can be used to reward PEV owners and purchasers. If all vehicles were to pay the same per mile RUC rate, many EV owners would realize savings relative to the existing $225 flat fee that drivers are paying today. And those that may even exceed that $225 amount under a RUC system could still maintain a significant operating cost advantage as compared to fossil fuel vehicles. And you can see in this chart, we've done some bars that plot the cost of, for example, a very fuel inefficient old Ford pickup truck at 15 miles per gallon. And we go up the scale, slowly coming over to a Prius and then a Nissan Leaf. The green portions of the bar represent the cost that driver is paying on average for 1,000 miles driven each month in gasoline. And then of course, the top green bars are what drivers would pay under a road usage charge for those same number of miles, assuming a flat rate of 2.4 cents by all drivers. And what you can see is that yes, while electric vehicles and highly efficient vehicles, hybrid vehicles like the Prius or the Ford Fusion do have costs, they are significantly lower and remain lower even with the RUC system in place. So will the cost to collect RUC be worth the revenue gained? We know at scale that RUC is going to have similar costs of collections of vehicle fees, and that net revenue will outperform the gas tax long term. But there is an expensive startup cost that cannot be avoided. And we wanted to get some perspective at looking at how much it would cost to collect RUC is compared to like a vehicle registration or what Seattle City Light does, or how much it costs to collect the fuel tax, which nobody's going to beat because that's under 1% of overhead. We also caught in here 520 tolls, the Tacoma Narrows tolls, T-Mobile and Costco to just give a sense of private sector costs as well in terms of what it costs to gain their clientele in terms of marketing and membership. We know that RUC at the beginning could be as high as 16% overhead when we're at a very small scale and a very small number of drivers participating. But as that scales up over time, we expect our collection costs to drop more in the range of a vehicle registration fee of around 8%, and potentially even lower than that as technology advances, collections improve, and more states shift to road usage charging, and thus we get more volumes participating. That scaling does drive costs. We know it will drive costs down, and it really is a matter of time, but it will require an upfront investment. Net revenues from Washington passenger fleets under a RUC do surpass the gas tax over time. This chart plots in a simple way what happens if the gas tax is kept flat over a number of years. And as you can see, it really does tank over time out to 2040 as the fleet transitions away from fossil fuel. Up here, we've got road usage charging that picks up and holds pretty steady, assuming the legislature never raises that rate again after the 2.4 cents rate is set. Now, the legislature has talked about, and they could index the gas tax, and you do see that it does pick up its ability to generate revenue, assuming there's inflation. But what happens is when they do that, it transfers the burden of paying that gas tax again to a shrinking base of drivers as that transition occurs from fossil fuel to electric vehicles. And this really does have a significant impact to our low-income drivers across the state. So how will out-of-state drivers pay to use the roads, especially if we don't have a national policy in place? We think the gas tax is something that needs to be kept in place, considering it's so cheap to collect. There's really no reason to get rid of it. We know in Washington state that about 5 to 8% of our total VMT is from drivers from out of state. And we believe that keeping the gas tax in place during a transitionary time from gas tax to road usage charging can ensure that we capture those revenues from visitors just like we are today. And that for vehicles, for passenger vehicles that most travel jurisdiction is Oregon, which is also transitioning to a RUC. So it's less of an issue perhaps for our state than other states. We also know that as an interim measure, as we watch our fleet slowly ramp up its transition to EVs and electric vehicles and hybrids, the charging stations certainly could capture revenue from out-of-state vehicles as well, who are charging in the state and using those charging stations that perhaps state tax dollars were used to put in place. So how can the state get started with road charging? We look at it as a dial, not a switch, a very slow transition of how we get there. The commission issued a report in 2020 that suggested the legislature take a very gradual transition approach, start out small and focus on plug-in electrics, hybrids, and the state-owned agency vehicle fleet. Now, the commission recommended the legislature authorize it as soon as possible, but by this year, which they haven't done yet. But it is on the table. And if you think about it, if we did get authorization sometime this year, we think within 2 years, we would be ready to start an actual small program of those vehicles that reflects about a 4% total makeup of our state's vehicle fleet. So it's a very small number of cars, relatively speaking, but an important step in helping us build our experience and start that transition as we basically prepare for a ramping up of the transition as many other pieces of the pie start getting put in place in terms of enabling that transition. We think by the late part of the decade, we would do a RUC readiness assessment for that first step of scaling up, see if we can potentially move into high MPG vehicles at that point and start bringing them over from the gas tax. And by 2030, we think we would be ready to extend RUC to all new passenger vehicles at that point. Down here at the bottom are just some major milestone activities to keep in mind along this timeline as you think about this transition. This is our research that's going on right now that'll be complete in 2023. We are doing a RUC equity impact in particular to assess how road usage charging will affect low-income drivers and underrepresented populations. This is the bar that kind of represents that price parity range that Bloomberg has put out on their forecasts as we think about this overall transition, noting that the state's clean vehicle incentive program sunsets in 2025. And lastly, this bar represents the soonest we could start defeasing the very large debt load we carry against our gas tax. That would start around 2030, but recognizing that the state, every time it raises its gas tax, or every time the legislature raises the gas tax, that gas tax is leveraged, debt is issued against it, and that carries a 30-year debt load each time those bonds are issued. So that will take a while to defease, yet another reason to keep the gas tax in place for now. Last session, substitute Senate Bill 5444 was introduced. It made it to the Senate floor on the second reading, and then they ran out of time. But the bill basically proposed a startup RUC program whereby July of 25, a voluntary early adoption of RUC would begin, allowing EVs and plug-in hybrids to opt in early to avoid the flat $225 flat fee, which, by the way, is the highest in the nation. On July of 26, that flat fee would be repealed, and the RUC program would replace it with an introductory rate for EVs at 2 cents per mile. And this would be a mandatory program at that point for those vehicles. Revenues generated from the RUC program would be deposited in the motor vehicle fund to pay for roadway preservation and maintenance under the bill. And it provided quite a bit of sections and lengthy language to protect privacy and driver data, exempting RUC data from public disclosure, for example. So this here down here just kind of plots those on the course of the timeline. And in the backdrop, you're seeing that ramp up chart of EV adoption that Bloomberg has put out. So what work remains in Washington to get ready? Well, we think we're ready for that small program today, but long-term, as we think about scaling up to the broader, bigger fleet over time, we know there's a lot of work to be done still. One is that we have to get better at being able to model the effects of AVs, ride sharing, and growing teleworking on revenue generation, just like we would think about it as the gas tax. So in this task one, in our current research, we are taking a deep dive and developing a new robust model that's going to help us simulate and better understand how sustainable will RUC be long-term as we think about these changing forces. We're doing a very extensive and comprehensive equity analysis to identify those potential disparate impacts that RUC could bring to communities of color, low-income households, and vulnerable populations. We're updating our mileage reporting methods, looking at the latest technology that's emerging, looking at vehicle telematics, maybe improve smartphone apps, and the use of retail payment options, for example, for drivers that maybe could pay their taxes through a private sector company or a service provider rather than directly to the state. We're working with our partner states in Oregon and Utah in particular on looking at ways to reduce cost of collection so that we can make a system that's more efficient, even though it may be small scale, to reduce those costs of collection up front. We're going to be developing a detailed phase-in plan, taking into account the findings from the research I just covered. And we'll be doing some small scale testing next year of some of those ideas that will emerge from that research related to reporting methods, equity policies, and ways to reduce costs. And lastly, we'll be issuing a RUC roadmap that will detail how Washington and other states can right-size their RUC policies and their systems to fit their circumstances. Keeping in mind, this research is also federally funded, and we have to make sure that we're providing information and research results that will benefit the national discussion, as well as our discussion in Washington state. This is our website where you can find a lot of information beyond what I've just shared. And you can visit there. You can see our final report along with every presentation that's been given to the steering committee and the commission, and a lot of work that might be of interest to some of you who want to look at the details. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Rima. Very informative. I will talk into the computer for the benefit of our online residents, and you hear me fine in the room, eh? Okay, so please put your questions up in the chat box and we'll relay those. And I'll kick it off with a couple and ask for a show of hands in the room. You certainly addressed a big concern, which is if the RUC was not subject to the 18th Amendment, what would fence in those revenues to be dedicated to road purposes and not get peeled off? Are the protections in the bill nearly as robust as the 18th Amendment?
No. They do it in statute. And so of course the constitutional amendment is the strongest way to lock down money, and also the hardest way to do it. Right now it would be in statute, and it would dedicate those dollars to maintenance and preservation under the Senate proposal. Keeping in mind, there's a lot of discussion going on around other investments that could be made with this money, including EV infrastructure investments.
How about anybody who wants to?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is Stephen Lowe speaking, President Emeritus of the Seattle EV Association. My main concern is equity in the size and weight of vehicles. In other words, we know that the Ford F-150 and 250 are very, very popular. Some of these things are not high mileage vehicles. However, if it's just 2.5 cents for his 15 cents versus 2.5 cents for my Chevy Bolt, he's going to be paying, he should be paying more for the wear and tear on the road vis-a-vis the weight of the vehicle, as do commercial trucks. The more they weigh, the more they pay. That's just my 2 cents, and I'll turn it back to the president.
Okay, so Rima, how will heavier vehicles pay more under a RUC?
Thank you. I was picking up a few words, but that was about it. Well, for this research that we've done so far, we have focused only on the passenger fleet, those cars that are under 10,000 pounds. And the reason we have not assessed heavy vehicles, the large trucks, and begun our work around that is because so far in this state, every time the legislature has raised the gas tax, they have also raised the weight fees on heavy vehicles to the tune of about 15% each time. So the idea was that while it's a bit crude, it is a proxy to assessing that weight impact to those heavy vehicle highways today. And so it was decided to focus right now on the passenger fleet, only recognizing that we will in the future need to take up the heavy vehicle matter. But for now, we know that vehicles under 10,000 pounds, while that seems like a big difference between, say, a 2,000-pound car and an 8,000-pound car, the truth of the matter is our highways are engineered to carry the weight of the heavy vehicles. So the relative cost impact by a varied weight of a passenger vehicle is de minimis at best, and thus really not worth the effort it would take to gather weight and try to set a rate setting structure against that. Having said that, it can be done. The legislature certainly could set up a rate schedule under a RUC system that did contemplate weight by weight categories. But we don't believe that's necessarily an effective way of using our dollars in terms of starting a program and keeping it simple, at least in the beginning.
Okay, another question from the room here.
Hi, I'm Louis Wolf. Have you considered collecting it through a tire tax? Since just about all tires have a mileage rating, you could calculate the tax per mile for the specific tire, and that would also be a way of addressing heavier vehicles because they require heavier duty tires.
We have not considered that. I'm not sure I totally understand how that would work. Nor am I sure that it would generate the revenue we'd be needing.
Most tires like have a 40,000 mile rating or 60,000 mile or 80,000 mile rating. And so that would tell you how many tires that the vehicle that car was put on should be driving. And so you could calculate the tax that car would pay per mile based on the rating of the tire.
Yeah, very curious, interesting idea. It would create a robust black market for tires, but I love it.
That really wouldn't correlate to actual road usage either. You'd be relying on a mileage rating on a tire that doesn't really reflect whether or not the driver actually drove those miles, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Well, it would also avoid privacy.
Yeah,
Concerns.
very interesting. One more from the room.
Hi, I'm Richard McHenry. Just curious about, you mentioned tolls, and I'm wondering on certain roads that are tolled now, would this replace the tolling, or in the other direction, would it be worth it to look to investigate tolling every road and thereby charging every car based on the same amount?
So the issue with RUC and tolling is that in order to charge a road usage charge, that would also replace those tolling opportunities would require, excuse me 1 minute, sorry. Got a dog that's decided to go a little crazy. Okay, sorry about that. We looked at that, but in order to do that, we would have to require GPS then, a GPS use, because we need to then know when drivers are on a particular facility, what time of day and what day of week, as we do today with tolling. So right now, it's not to say that in the future, this couldn't be merged, and there certainly are opportunities today if a program advanced in road charging where we could connect those programs from the back office side so that as a consumer, you know, you have one account, you're paying for your tolls and your rec charges out of one account. That certainly is achievable and something we've recommended. But in terms of actually requiring drivers to pay their tolls through a RUC system would force drivers to have GPS. And we think right now that privacy choice is too important to forego taking away our toll gantries and shifting to that. But like I said, you know, in the future with technology advancements, it's certainly possible that we could get there down the road.
But with this road use charge, then eliminate tolling on certain toll roads. An example would be 405 through Bellevue.
No, it would not eliminate it. They would coexist just like the gas tax and tolling coexist today.
But then I'm paying double for doing the same mileage.
Just like today.
Just like today.
Yeah, you're paying exactly those toll dollars. Keep in mind, generated on those facilities are dedicated to those roadways. So, example, on 405, all the revenues collected on those express tollings stay in the express tollings in the corridor. Same as for 520. Meanwhile, the road charges we collect would go into a bigger motor vehicle fund, just like the gas tax, and be used for roadways and transportation statewide.
Okay, we've got about 4 more questions in the room, so we'll try and cycle through them quickly.
Hi, my name is Gary Amundsen. My question to you has to do with out of state and out of country driving. So did the 2 of your models that you use the GPS, is that your plan to offer that up to discount the miles out of our area?
I mean, that, if you want to have the most accurate taxation structure in terms of only paying for the miles you drive on public roadways in Washington state, GPS is the way to go. But we know not everybody's going to want that. And that smartphone app we tested is really, we think, a bridge technology that would enable drivers who don't want GPS on while they're in the state, but they also don't want to pay for the miles they drive out of state. They certainly could turn that app on and be able to somehow certify those miles when they're out of state. So there are ways, and we know we have work to do on improving that. But we think we have a start on that, and we certainly don't want drivers to feel like they're having to pay taxes on something they didn't incur.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name's Paul. The current, what you call the flat fee of $225 per tab is actually 2 fees. $150 goes to roads, and then the other 75 goes to building infrastructure. So if all of the RUC eliminates the entire $225, what happens to our infrastructure bill?
Well, that's a good point, and that's something the legislature is going to have to wrestle with. But we do recognize that the current distribution of that flat fee is different than what the Senate proposed in their bill. But we do continue to advocate that they consider investing those dollars in EV infrastructure, charging infrastructure, as a portion of that. We also have a huge maintenance backlog that these dollars, the Senate feels anyway, should be prioritized towards. So that's really a policy call by the legislature. It's certainly something they're going to have to wrestle with if they repeal that flat fee.
Yeah, hi, this is Kevin. The amount of driving I do out of state is a negligible percentage of the total. Why are we paying so much attention to miles driven out of state? It doesn't seem like it justifies the return.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a fair point, right? And I think ultimately, some people it's going to be important to who drive out of state a lot, but that's the point of offering those options of collection so that drivers have a choice. If they don't care, they can take that manual approach and it's a non-issue, and it's actually the cheapest way to collect it. But if we want drivers to have the choice of being able to do that, GPS will be required in some form. So we just want to make sure we're kind of thinking about all those options, given that it is important to some people in the population for sure.
Yeah, this is Randy. I've got a question about the accuracy of the odometers. My car has a 2-mile error in the odometer. So if I drive 60 miles in 60 minutes, I actually only travel 58. How is your system going to compensate for that?
Right. Well, those manual approaches, there definitely is some give and take for sure. It's going to be less precise. Now, if we use vehicle telematics, or that plug-in device that plugs into your OBD2 port, the accuracy off of telematics is tighter than that and is pretty spot on. So there's going to be some give and take, but I will say that we do have leakage in every tax we have in the state in terms of revenue, and even the gas tax has a percentage of leak. So we're not expecting any system to be 100%, but if we can get within 98 or 99%, we're going to be pretty happy.
Okay, I have a collector car that does not have an electronic odometer and it's broken.
Right.
Or I know an awful lot about computer security. and I don't trust my cell phone to do anything for finances. So how can we be sure that somebody that's clever, because we have a society full of clever people coming from all around the world, don't hack the system and nothing works?
Yes, so there will be a small portion of vehicles. Over time, it will become less and less that are going to fall into that category, being so old they don't have an odometer and they don't have any way to tax them. We've talked about, we didn't test it, but we have been talking with lawmakers about a flat ruck fee that could be assessed in those cases where drivers would just pay a flat amount and be done. But there's also the fact that as long as the gas tax is kept on at the pump, we are collecting that gas tax every time those vehicles are filled up. And in case of a ruck system, if I were on the ruck system, but I'm filling my gas powered car all the time, I'm basically prepaying my ruck charges every time I fill up, because we would be giving you a credit for those gas taxes paid. So in a way, it becomes very difficult, not impossible, but difficult to game the system or to evade the taxation.
So with all this data collection, who's going to own the data?
So right now, the way we're looking at it and the way it was tested is the state never took possession of location data or mileage. We got an anomalized total roll up after our private vendor was able to certify that I was in state and I was on a public road in the case of folks that were doing GPS or that Mile Mapper app. The location data was thrown away basically or disposed of. And the state got a rolled up total amount of miles, right? People had accounts in the pilot, and just similar to tolling, each participant, including me, set up an account. My car was assigned to that account, and I reported my mileage on a quarterly basis, taking a picture of my odometer, and that total mileage was shared. But beyond that, the state didn't get any further information. Now, if I had a plug-in GPS device, the state was not collecting that. State law will need to dictate how that data is handled, how is it disposed of, who owns it, who has a right to access it, under what circumstance, and so on it goes. And so these are the laws that we're working with them to craft now to govern that, so that we can make sure the public's clear on how it's going to work when this program is actually in place. So it won't be left unanswered, but certainly they're going to have to work through all those detailed provisions. And it's very similar to tolling in a lot of ways, although this will have mileage data as well. But we have provisions today on what happens with tolling data that's collected as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Rima. I'll wrap it up with one niggle I never seen answered, which was if you're using the smartphone app, did you have to click it every time you rode in someone else's vehicle, lest you be double charged?
Yes, there was that is one of the issues with the smartphone app, or what if two people get into the car and they both have the app? The driver would have to disable the app to ensure they weren't getting charged for miles they didn't mean to get charged for. But that does, again, introduce some of the challenges of using a smartphone as the only device we use to collect miles. And we realize there's going to be more research and testing needed if we're going to really transition to relying solely on a cell phone.
Yeah, Sound Transit could harvest a trainload of taxes that way. Okay, well, this has been most informative. We're coming up on time. If there's some follow-on questions from the membership, I would send them on to Rima via email, but
Sure.
You've been very generous with your time, as has your dog. So thank you much.
Thank you. And thank you for being patient with my dog. And I'm happy to send these slides to you if you all like to have a copy of them.
All right, and we'll keep the Zoom session going for the rest of the meeting. Rima, you're welcome to hang around for as long as you like.
Okay, thank you.
All right, very nice. Well, we have a bunch of events coming up, primarily the cultural rally this Saturday, yes? Grace has been our primary organizer on that. We have a full docket of speakers set for St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral as the jumping off point, gathering at 10:30 a.m. on Saturday to decorate our cars, right?
That's right. Although I don't think, only if we're standing right here can the people on Zoom hear us, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, sure.
You could use the mic.
Doesn't very well.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay. So yeah, I hope a lot of people are going to come to this, because even though it's going to be a warm day, we're starting early And so it'll be done by 1 o'clock. And so out of there before the hottest part of the day. Looking forward to hearing some speakers, including our own Jay Donaway is going to get up and give the electric vehicle owners perspective of why should we get rid of gasoline cars by 2030? Well, not get rid of them, but just a policy of trying to not be able to not sell cars anymore with a gasoline engine past 2030. And one of the things that I hope that he will mention is that here in Washington State, because we have cheap, clean energy already, and because we also have expensive gasoline with high gas taxes, this is the best place to convert to electric. And so we should be the leaders in the country for switching to electric. Some other places have said, yeah, by 2035, but we think we can do it sooner here. So we're gathering at 10:30. Hi there. Good. Gathering at 10:30 in the morning, and bring signs if you want. There'll be some signs there. There'll be some paint for your windows. You can put anything, any kind of messages you want to say about, yes, converting to electric driving. I'm going to put some driving on sun power pictures in my window, for instance. And then we'll take off and just do a little drive around Capitol Hill for about half hour or so. Come back, park cars in the parking lot at the cathedral there in time for noon, at which point a bunch of people are planning to come. I understand a lot of students from the UW are coming down, a bunch of people who are involved in sustainability and climate issues are all going to be coming too. And then we'll have some speakers talking about what this goal is all about. Representative Macri is going to be there because she was the sponsor of this bill in the legislature. And she's the main sponsor. A lot of people signed on to it, and it did pass before the governor vetoed it. So we think that this will be a good way to get the attention of the executive branch and talk about, getting this goal put in place without having to go back to the legislature. We should do it sooner, as soon as possible, because it's going to come up pretty soon. So anything you could do to make voices heard about supporting electric cars, this is the chance to do it. So hopefully a lot of people will gather up there. If you are coming and not bringing an electric car, then they're asking, because there's very limited parking around there, if you could ride the bus or take a bike or carpool or park over at Volunteer Park or something like that, that would be great. Any other questions about that? I'm excited we get to actually do an event. We're asking everybody to wear masks, and we'll have masks there too, just because of the spike in the viruses. We want everybody to be safe. So even though it's outside, we'll be outdoors on the lawn in front of the cathedral. We're just suggesting everybody wear a mask anyway. Good. Great. Hope to see you. Lots of people there. Yay.
Thank you, Grace. I'm sorry, I thought you online people would want to see my face and hear my voice more clearly. Other speakers from the room, we'll ask them to move in front of the screen here for your benefit. And for those of you who didn't follow the 2030 gas bill, clean cars bill closely, it was killed at the 11th hour by a poison pill amendment that said it wouldn't take effect until the vast majority of cars on the road were subject to the RUC anyway. So that would have rendered it moot, and the governor then was basically forced to veto it. And we're basically asking him to implement the parts that he liked via executive order instead. That sum it up? Excellent, thank you. We also have coming this week the Clean Cars Expo. I just blanked on the name of the trade show. GTSE, Green Transportation Summit and Expo, at the Tacoma Dome, well, at the LeMay Museum on Sunday night, which follows an air-cooled Volkswagen show on Sunday day, which I hope to be participating in, maybe even with Carmody Electric, and a Monday, Tuesday event at that conference. People can show up at the door and pay day registrations, I do believe. So catch that if you can. And then we have been invited back to America's, well, not America's Car Museum, but the LeMay Family Collection at Marymount. You may recall the EVs were the featured mark for the first time 2 years ago when that show was last held. And they have asked if SEVA would like to join again as a club so we could have a special club area set aside. I need to get back with them within the next 5 days with our answers. So I'd say wherever 3 or more are gathered in our name, we could call that a club function. Anybody want to show at Marymount, Spanaway? Maybe. Okay. I will forward that announcement to the SEVA list and try and drum up some more support and attendees for that.
Yeah, I would love to add to that real quickly because of the fact that we're doing events now. I've been kind of playing around with the idea of having a way for people to sign up and having all the information about specific events in one place so everybody can go and see where it is, what's happening, what we need, who's going to be there. And one platform that I've used extensively in the past is called Sign Up Genius. So I've played around with creating an account for us so that we can send out invitations to everybody here and everybody can all reply to one place and we'll know if there's people coming, who's going to be able to take our banners and our signs and stuff with them. So might try doing that for this for the Marymount thing.
Genius.
Yeah, I think it might be fun. Cool. Yeah.
I'm re-looking that up because it rolled off my screen. Wait, did we have any other events to get on the SEVA calendar?
Well, we haven't yet put together a drive electric future thing. I haven't heard from anybody about any locations or any ideas that they might have. So that is still open, although it's getting late. So we want to put something together pretty quickly. It's coming up in about 6 weeks.
Yes, of course, our good friend down in Steilacoom, Dick Murray, has his National Drive Electric Week on September 11th. Taking over downtown Steilacoom. I will be there. And if you need your fix before then, we are looking at September 21st, Saturday, September 21st, for the Marymount event at the Family Collection. So that's coming up fast and I need to get word to them by the week before, the 15th. Would you take this chair and describe your success at that event?
Yeah, we actually went to the Kirkland Auto Show last weekend and several of us were there. Kevin and I went, Philip brought his Model 3 and Larry Ryan brought his S10 pickup. And that got a lot of attention. He had the hood open, he had the signage and everything. He's got it all prettied up. It looks terrific, new tires and everything. So he got a lot of attention and a couple of people looked at the Teslas too, but we were able to share our message with a lot of people about electric driving and how these are the new classic cars. A lot of people there. It was very well attended. The weather wasn't terrific, but it wasn't too hot either. So I guess you can't complain. We did have our SEVA brochures there and we had a number of handouts that we gave to people about driving electric, charging, things like that. So I'd be surprised. I was surprised at the number of people who said, oh yeah, I got one of those already, or I ordered mine last week, or yeah, Kirkland is quite a hotbed of electric driving already. So we definitely were talking to a lot of people. The folks, his name is Jason with the orange Carmen Ghia conversion. He was there getting a lot of attention too. Wasn't with us, but we told him next time he's got to be with us. And also a gentleman with a red Ford Mustang Mach-E was there too. And he was generating a lot of attention for that car.
I thought he was going to be here tonight.
Yeah, he said he might come. Yeah, right. Oh, this gentleman has the other Mach-E. Yeah.
Right? You emailed this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're important too. Thank you for coming.
So it was fun to be able to start doing events again. I'm excited about that and I hope we can do more.
All righty then. Checking the chat again for any Any questions from the peanut gallery? I am speaking more slowly and clearly now, Gene. Sorry for that. And yes. Oh, the 50-50 raffle. Have we accumulated any funds in the pot yet? Okay, so Grace is going to make the rounds of the room selling 50-50 raffle tickets. SEVA's once and future primary fundraising means. Charlie Sy has put a lot of work in the past month, getting our accounts in order, getting our registrations updated with the state, and procuring this wonderful new computer that I am talking to you on, as the last SEVA laptop died not a month after its warranty expired with a motherboard failure. So thank you, Charlie, for that. I had thought we would have a project update from Rich Rudman, but he made his cameo appearance and ran for the ferry 15 minutes ago. Only those here were able to see the Iota rock crawler in all of its glory. Any other project updates? Mr. Lowe.
Oh, just update, King Television, sometime in the 9 o'clock hour, sometime in the 10 o'clock hour. We tried to keep SEVA on the map with them. I guess they had called you earlier, but you're so busy.
Yeah, as I mentioned in the opening monologue, King 5 did manage to interview President Lowe about the upcoming plethora of grants for EV charging in Joe Biden's executive order and some more in the infrastructure bill.
Time watching television. There was that there should be more destination places like the ocean. I mean, I under that myself, driving my boat to Long Beach for that 7 miles, and in your state parks, the federal parks, and the need for people that live in apartments and the condominiums to have charging. So those points were made. I hope they come through in the cutting room when they cut all the really juicy parts out.
Yes, and if Miss Rima is still listening, we had a really nice kind of a design charrette with Konya Buell a number of years ago to prioritize the state priorities on EVSE deployment. And it may be time to repeat that effort, because Electrify America has done its damage. I mean, done its deployments all around the state. I'm proud to report that the Poulsbo Walmart DC fast charging station looks nearly ready to flip the switch. But Electrify America also announced that they will stop Chatamo deployments entirely in 2022. I can't say this was a surprise to anybody, given their compliance with the letter, but not the spirit of the settlement that created them in the first place with regards to standards agnostic charging. And Elon Musk looks set to actually open the superchargers to all who become capable of using them. So that could be interesting in the next few years. We're coming up on time, only 8:10 actually. Any more comments from the peanut gallery?
I'd like to point out, current SCAD's law that nobody ever reads allows you to call up and tell them that you drove a certain number of miles in another state and get a refund. So this is not new.
That is very interesting. I don't think I know I've never called the state and reclaimed the miles that I drove out of state on vacation, though of course they ought to ask me then how many gallons I bought while I was out of state on vacation too. But there are mechanisms, existing mechanisms to recover our taxes, just like Oregon residents could attest that they lived out of state when buying goods in Washington and avoid our sales tax. Mr. Lowe.
I thought the most interesting part about Elon Musk's dissertation on opening the charging station, it has nothing to do with Ford Motor Company, General Motors, Chrysler, or any of the others. It is he's going to let people sign into privately. In other words, if I wanted to, I'll do it and I'll pay the fees to use it. But it has nothing to us to buy the adapters, to use the Tesla if we want to.
We can buy a ticket to the walled garden, but we don't have to pay a middleman. I like it. Anything else? Any words from the racing community? Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. No. Okay. Well, the weather's still good here and the sun is high. There's more networking to be done in the parking lot. Okay, the sun is setting. Anyway, last call for questions in the chat from the online audience. We still have 9 participants online. I don't see any hands raised or new questions in the chat. Okay. You can unmute yourselves and speak if you like. Thank you all. We'll go into open session now. Oh, one last call for tickets. Is this the final sale?
Yes, and what we also haven't done is ask who's new here tonight.
Oh,
After they have
goodness.
just introduced themselves.
I'm sorry, we normally do that at the
Everybody
beginning and I omitted to do so. Online, do we have any new people? I see very familiar names. Nope, we're down to 5. That was quickly. I scared them away.
They want to talk.
In the room, I'm sorry, gentlemen with the Maki, I could not recognize you behind your mask.
My name is Richard McHenry, and I've had my Mach-E now for just over a month. I had a plug-in C-Max before that.
Okay.
So I chose to get it switched to a second EV, partial EV. But this is before you, and you would like to tour after the meeting's over, be happy to show up.
Excellent. Quite an upgrade for sure.
And I've been on meetings online. My name's Noble Hendricks. We have a meeting. And mostly just interested in sort of, well, conversion. So I'd love to talk to folks. Sort of marine or boat.
Okay, Nomo Hendricks interested in ocean-going conversions. Noble,
N-O-B-L-E.
fine and noble name. Okay,
Do I count as you? First time I actually showed up.
yes, our Zoom host.
My name's Ed Mills. I'm wearing a mask, I'll take it off. Ed Mills, we have a Leaf and FUV, which is the tricycle thing out in the parking lot.
An Archimoto has brought to us.
And Jay has the old Miles that I used to drive,
Yes,
although he might not admit.
it is still cultivating moss. Yes, it is. The old Miles NEV. Okay, and okay. Well, again, I'll encourage folks to sign up for the September 11th National Drive Electric Week. And we had a solicitation in the chat earlier for the Drive Electric Week event at, which one was that? Mill Creek area on September 26th. Okay, Mill Creek, September 26th, and due. And yes, studded tires should have been taxed more. There was a question we didn't get to on a gas vehicle opting into the RUC. How do they not pay gas taxes at the pump? I didn't hear an answer to that one, if anyone else caught it. Ah, there can be a refund.
You have to talk about how much gas you bought.
Just like propane vehicle drivers are supposed to send in a form to the state attesting to how many miles they drove and voluntarily turn over their road tax.
Ordering on the internet is supposed to take sales tax.
Yeah. Okay. Last call for questions. Let's have a drawing. What's in the pot?
Hi, I just,
Hey,
sorry
okay.
I'm late. I just joined this meeting.
Erica
I missed-
Berg.
Yes, hi, I missed everything and I'm sorry.
Oh, do you have a question?
My question is, I do. Will you post a like summary or recap of this meeting in the SEVA group by chance?
And we have even recorded it all, so you can
Oh,
see
great.
the excellent presentation.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thanks for coming in, Erica. How many winnings is Erica gonna miss out on? $31 to the winner.
Somebody has to admit to doing that.
Lucky Low did not gamble for once. Lucky Randy at the back of the room. $31 to the winner. Drawing number 2 for a Model S model in a tiny little plastic box.
Should have gone in now that they're on the hood.
Noble winner, indeed. That's it for you. Okay, 2 raffle winners. I'll wrap it up online. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Just leave the meeting, it'll cover.